The human conscience. What did St. Thomas teach about it? Thomas said that the conscience is an act by which we apply universal principles to everyday situations. Let's unpack that some. The conscience is an act. Thomas did not mean that with our conscience we go somewhere and do something. What he meant was exactly what the Catechism teaches. The conscience is a judgment of reason about the moral quality of a particular act that we've engaged in the past. It's in our history, that we're presently doing, or something we're contemplating doing in the future. It can also be an act we must not do under any circumstances, or something we should do, but we're tempted not to do, right? The conscience is an act by which we apply universal principles. Underscore apply universal principles. What are these principles? The natural law and objective moral norms. These are universal in scope because every human person has knowledge of the natural law and objective moral norms. The natural law is implanted in all people by God. For example, it's wrong to murder. We all know this. No one has to be taught it's wrong to murder. This is a precept of the natural law. It's an objective moral norm. The natural law is called natural because it's proper to human nature. Again, it's universal in scope. All people share in knowledge of the natural law. But right away we notice there's a problem, right? Not everyone fully recognizes the natural law. Not everyone understands it to the same extent. Why? The problem is rooted in original sin, that first sin of our first parents, who we call Adam and Eve, committed at the dawn of time in disobedience to God, that sin which exceeded the limits of their human freedom. It had effects on them and on all their posterity, on you and on me. One of those effects is ignorance, a darkening of the human intellect, confusion. And so today we have a problem with being confused about the precepts of the natural law. There's a lot of confusion, for example, about the Ten Commandments and the full extent of their meaning. Although people easily recognize that murder is evil, they don't so easily recognize other elements of the natural law. For example, many people today fail to recognize that the use of contraceptives in marriage to prevent pregnancy is contrary to the natural law. The point is, there's confusion and darkness about the full extent of the natural law and what constitutes objective moral norms. What's the solution? The solution is to properly form our conscience. As Catholics, the first place we go to do this is tradition, scripture, and the magisterium of the Church. The magisterium, the teaching authority of the Church, is a wellspring of information that assists us in educating our conscience, and thus it helps us to live upright lives of virtue. For these and other reasons, the Catechism of the Catholic Church serves as a primary source for forming our conscience. St. Thomas said we must follow a certain conscience, and the Church, in fact, teaches this. If our conscience, through a judgment of reason, alerts us to do something, then we must do it. If it moves us to refrain from doing something, then we must not do it. However, what if we're wrong? The fact is, our conscience is fallible. We can be wrong in our decisions. God will not hold us responsible if we're ignorant about what we should do through no fault of our own. This is called invincible ignorance. So God does not hold us responsible for what we cannot know or what we know incorrectly through no fault of our own. But there's a catch, because if our conscience is misinformed and we act wrongly, even if we think we're doing the right thing, we're still causing some type of damage. Why? Because we're acting wrongly, which points to the essential need to properly form our conscience. By doing so, we act in correct ways. We make correct judgments about the moral qualities of our acts. And we act in ways that are truly beneficial to ourselves and to others. We act in ways that are aligned with the true good. And there's another catch, you might say. If we intentionally neglect to form our conscience when we have an opportunity to do so, then we're not invincibly ignorant. We're not ignorant about some moral truth through no fault of our own. It's just the opposite. We are vincibly ignorant. In other words, we're ignorant through our own fault, which makes us culpable before God. By properly forming our conscience, we are allowed to a much greater extent to live a moral life of excellence and virtue. And that is the road to happiness.